Hey guys, it's Alex here. I figured I'd do an impromptu video talking about the lasers because I've been getting a lot of questions from users and people that are interested in either using the laser or potentially buying the laser. And common questions are, like what's the best laser to get, how do you use it and all that stuff. So I figured I'd just do a quick video here discussing some of those things. So just first off, this is kind of what the device will look like. It's about this size over here. You can see my hand. It's about the size of the palm of my hand. And it's fairly light. It's battery operated and it's able to be charged with just a typical USB port. Takes about 2 hours to charge it up and it doesn't need to be fully charged to be used. When you get it, it will work right out of the box. There's also a battery port over here that can be opened, and it can be used with a 9 volt AC adapter if you wanted to use it for longer periods of time. Typically, it'll last on a full charge of maybe 40 to 60 minutes, depending on the model that you have. So there's different models that we offer. The number of lasers on the kind of lowest model would be four, and on the higher model would be six. So the only difference between those two are basically the quantity of lasers. The more lasers that you have, um, you're reducing effectively the amount of time that you need to use the device in a particular session. It doesn't make it any more effective. You can get the same, therapeutic value with a four that you would with a six, just with a longer period of time. The only other difference is that the six might offer a different combination of lasers. Um, so the simplest of the devices, which don't take that to mean that it's least effective, because we've had the most feedback and experience from the red lasers, the 660 nanometers, and the device will emanate the light radiation in a line pattern. So you see, as I kind of bring the device out, the line grows, and as I get closer, it shrinks. And that's because the light is kind of diverging out in this linear pattern. So the intensity is actually a little stronger the closer that you are, but you're treating a smaller area. And the farther you get out, the intensity will diminish, but you're treating a large area. So it ends up being a wash. One is treating more area with a weaker beam, and then so on and so forth. Our lasers, one of the questions that we get often is, how does your lasers compare to other devices? That's not a very easy question to answer because that's like kind of comparing two cars, right? You'd have to have a lot of people drive both cars, and then there's also a personability. But we can talk about the technical aspects of our laser. I'd say our lasers are most similar to the Erconia lasers, and those are the most expensive lasers out there, typically between ten and $18,000. And our lasers actually have more. So typically the Erconia lasers will have only two lasers in them, and we have four to six. The intensities are very similar. They're both class 2 laser devices. By definition, a class 2 laser device is a device that does not require any eyewear when you're using, because the blink reflex is quick enough relative to the intensity of the laser that it would be protective of the retina. Now, a common question that we get asked is the power of the actual individual laser diodes. And that's something that, um, you know, part trying to do this video, trying to give people some perspective. The power of that the laser diode puts out isn't always directly comparable if you wanted to compare it between two devices. So, for instance, I could have a 10 milliwatt laser diode over here, and I could have a 15 milliwatt laser diode over here. The laser light that emanates from the device and goes out into a specific area, um, that intensity will be a function of the optics that are in the device. Our device uses a lenticular lens and a diverging, which is a diverging lens, right? So the intensity spreads out over distance. If you had just a straight laser pointer, it would be focused in a very, very small dot. Rather than if you're spreading the light out, it gets less intense as you back away from it. One of them causes a very intense beam in a small area, and the other one, the intensity varies as a function of distance. Because of that aspect, you are allowed to effectively get a higher powered laser diode to meet safety regulations because you're spreading the intensity over an area. The intensity of these diodes, if they were point-like, this would no longer be considered a class 2 device. It would be much higher. So you basically the point that I'm trying to get across there is that you can't always look at whether something is a class 2 device or a class 1 device or a class 3 device and say, oh, okay, this is more powered necessarily than another one. It's a function of how that intensity is spread out, what the optics are using. The optics themselves will be absorbing some of the light too. And because of all these effects, it's very hard to say, okay, some people will say, well, what's the milliwatt rating of the lasers compared to something else? You can't really compare those two things, apples to apples. There's a lot of things that kind of go into that. I guess the simplest analogy would be is that you can have like two trucks, right? So they're, American type trucks, and then there could be like, Japanese type trucks. And not to say that one is more powerful than the other, they can achieve similar powers with different engines. It's a function of the drivetrain and the transmission and all of the things. Some of the Japanese models use higher RPMs to achieve the same kind of torques and things like that. So, looking at the intensity, the power rating of the laser isn't really always going to give you the most information. But so these are class 2 laser devices, and they're legal to own. They're certified with the FDA for safety for class 2 compliance. Class 3 devices and above, they start to get into a little bit trickier territory in terms of the legalities and things like that. One thing to note is that so these are not medical devices, right? This is for personal photobiomodulation use and research. There are no laser devices that are approved to treat any conditions such as autism or Parkinson's or any cognitive disorders, traumatic brain injuries, and things like that. Certainly, there is a lot of literature out there that supports that these photobiomodulation in general can be helpful for some of these things. But in order for something to be FDA approved for a medical indication, there's a significant level of a burden of studies that you have to do. It's extremely expensive, and you're talking about years and years and years for something to be FDA approved, and then it is allowed to be reimbursable. Currently, right now in the laser arena, there is very few conditions that lasers can be used for in this photobiomodulation arena. So things like weight loss, things like hair loss, right? I mean, maybe I should look into that. And things like I think low level inflammation and pain. Those are some some companies actually have them FDA approved for that. Everything else is kind of off-label use from that perspective. We're not allowed to make any claims for our devices. They're for, general wellness, personal photobiomodulation, and research use. That being said, we're allowed to share what other people have said about our devices, and there's some videos, or rather a YouTube kind of compilation of some of the messages that people have left and some messages that we've screenshotted from people in writing, people that have used the device. Um, so, in terms of the use of the device, I'd say that we have the most feedback on the red. We know what the red can be very helpful for individuals. And then there are some other colors like green and violet. So red is 660 nanometers, green is 520, violet is 405 nanometers. There is another laser that we hope to have approved maybe within the next month or two. There's a lot of work that goes involved. It's very expensive, and that would be a near infrared model. It'll be a variation, so it'll have some near infrared and some other things like either red or green or violet or any combination there. Um, and so I'll talk a little bit about the differences between those things. Keep in mind that just because we offer different options doesn't necessarily mean that they're better. Just because things are more expensive just doesn't necessarily mean that they're better. The function of this expense goes into the cost to get the items, the difficulty in the circuitry involved to support them, and also the complexity of the certifications involved in actually getting that device certified. Red, what we can do is we can talk about the physical characteristics of red. There's this a very nice curve, and maybe I can share my screen for a second here so you can kind of get an inference of what's going on. Um, and there is a document that I shared in the group that has a lot of information that talks about kind of the physics here. But this curve over here is what's called it's kind of the relationship between the absorption of the light and the wavelength that's incident upon the particular medium here. So along the x-axis, wavelength. The wavelength is related to the color. It's also related to the frequency, and the absorption is basically kind of like the attenuation of the beam, if you will. So, um, what's nice about the red light in particular is that it interacts very well with the mitochondria in this this particular area that helps to kind of generate ATP. And the reaction sites are typically kind of in the blood, in the hemoglobin, and it's a function of whether the blood is oxygenated or not. Whether or not there's the level of melanin in the tissue and things like that. But when the light is interacting, it's being attenuated by all of these things. Um, I'll show you an example over here with some water in a couple of seconds. But a lot of the times I'll get questions about the penetration. So I'll get, well, hey, we really want to look at near infrared because it penetrates very deep and we want to get into the brain. And yes, there's some truth to that, but you have to take everything with the full understanding. Um, Near infrared, so that's going to longer wavelengths, there will be more penetration because that light scatters less in the medium relative to something like red or green or violet. As you get kind of more towards the violet, you'll get more scattering, meaning that the light, when it interacts with the medium, isn't coherent anymore, it kind of goes into a lot of different directions. There is more mitochondria activity in the red region than there is in the near infrared region. So although that you're getting more penetration and you're getting to deeper areas in the head, it's partly of that part of that reason is because the light isn't interacting. It's interacting less. And the whole point is that you want it to interact. It will interact somewhat. So yes, you can get some intensity deeper in the brain, but in terms of what its function is doing is stimulating the mitochondria, that is significantly less as compared to red. There is kind of a sweet spot between 660 nanometers and about 800 so nanometers. And the other device that we're looking at is the other laser that we'll be offering is 808 nanometers, where you get kind of this nice blend of interaction in the mitochondria and also penetration. As you go higher and higher in wavelength, you'll get much more penetration, but you get a lot of absorption of that intensity turning into heat, being absorbed by the water, which is something that you don't want to do. You don't want to shine your laser and have, blood is composed somewhat of there's a water component and have it basically channeling its benefit to the water. You don't want it to basically, it be passing by the mitochondria that's in the tissue over there. So don't always think that more penetration means better. More penetration is also a function of that it's actually just running by. It's just kind of like the bus at the bus stop that just you missed the stop. And so there is becomes less utility there. The other thing is that the heating component that goes into the water is non-ideal. You don't want to heat the tissue up. I think Arconia has some really good videos that talk about why they have their specific intensities of their lasers relative to some other ones. And with any of the lasers, what you will get a small fraction of heating that's happening. Now, if you keep on cranking the intensity up, you'll get more and more heating. So a lower intensity laser won't necessarily give you less penetration, but it'll give you more heating as a function of time. A lower laser will allow that heat to dissipate over that same period of time, and it's a less ideal, non-ideal consequence. Um, you know, as you go to the kind of the green wavelengths, you'll get more scattering, and go to the violet, you'll get more scattering as well. And when people talk about penetration, something that you want to understand is that it isn't kind of the be all end all of the light stopping specifically. So I have this kind of table over here that talks about the penetration as a function of the wavelength here. So I have, for instance, 405 nanometers, 520, 660, 808, and this is the penetration depth. So a lot of times people will see this number and they think that that's the light just stops over there. So for instance, red is 5 to 10 millimeters. They'll say, oh, that doesn't go past a centimeter into the tissue. And that's wrong. It's incorrect. Because the light attenuates expansion exponentially, and the penetration depth is the depth that basically categorizes the loss and the intensity of the beam to a mathematical relationship, which is 1 over E, right? E is the exponential, 2.718. That ends up being about 37% of the beam. So after one penetration depth, in this case for red, which is about, 1 centimeter, you still have 37% of the beam left. If you go two penetration depths, you have about 13% of the beam left. Three, you have 5% of the beam. Five penetration depths, it has 0.7% of the beam left. So you never get down to zero because it's kind of like this exponential tail that's getting asymptotically close to zero. Why is that important, right? Because, 0.7% of the beam doesn't sound like a lot. But a laser is extremely intense. If you do the mathematical, the physics of how many photons, because it's an individual photon that's interacting with the mitochondria, that's coming out of the laser, right? You know the effectively the power rating of the laser in milliwatts that can be converted to joules. There's something called Planck's constant. It's related to the wavelength and the speed of light and the frequency. You can determine how many photons are coming out every second from this particular wavelength of this milliwatt laser. So for instance, I ran through some of the calculations over here. So you can see, for instance, if you have a per milliwatt rating of a laser, we just choose one, and these lasers are more powerful than that. After 10 penetration depths, you have a very large amount of photons. Okay, the number of photons coming out from the device is on the order of 10 to the 15. It's a huge number, right? 10 with 15 zeros. And then after 10 penetration depths, so in the case of red, will be 10 centimeters, right? You'll still have a huge 10 to the 10 power of photons coming out. So what you don't want to take from this is that, okay, the penetration depth is the be all end all. The light continues well after that. Now, what happens is that the light scatters, so it's no longer coherent. So rather than being in a beam, it goes in all directions. It's kind of like a flashlight. And the more medium that there is, it'll go in all kind of directions there. Um, the other thing is that the penetration is going to be significantly impeded by the absorption of the light or the interaction with the mitochondria. So, kind of case in point over here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. I'll show you here. So here's a, laser device. I'm going to turn it on here. So you can see, it's clearly not coming out the other side of my hand, right? I mean, I have it right up against it. Um, Now, if you take, I don't have a piece of bone in front of me, but I had actually had a coyote skull that I bought off Amazon. If you shine it through, about 8, 9 millimeters of bone, you do see it come out of the other side, bone, right? So here's a glass of water. It's pretty wide, so almost like a bowl. And you'll see if I put the laser through there, it's certainly coming out the other end. And there's way more water in this bowl than there is thickness in my hand. And the reasoning for that is partly because, water is somewhat transparent to light, but there's a good amount of water in your blood. The main reason why it's not coming out is because the light is actually scattering and it's being absorbed by the medium in my hand, the interaction sites. So the combination of the scattering, it moving in multiple directions, and the tissues in my hand, the melanin, the mitochondria, the iron components that are in the blood, these all allow for absorption. So you're actually interacting with the medium there. So that's kind of just some of the basics with absorption and penetration there. Um, in terms of so certainly people have been using red on the head, and it works, from that perspective. I don't think that certainly my favor would not be going over 800 nanometers of near infrared, based on my understanding, but based in my experience, based on what I think is going to be beneficial for people. I think between the 660 and the 880, you're going to see a sweet spot there. I honestly think that the red is actually better than the 880. That's my own belief and my own preference, but I think when you put them together, you can get an additional benefit. How much of that benefit is there? I think it's obviously going to be very subjective, but I don't think it's much because I know there's a lot of buzz about people getting these NIR versions over here. I think it's kind of the difference between, having a car, with roll down windows and having a car with some power windows, to be honest with you. And certainly we've experienced that because we have a ton of people using the reds, and we get great feedback from that. What about green and violet? So green is interesting because green, and all of these lights have the potential to interact with the complexes in the mitochondria slightly different. But green has a similar type of effect, that I would liken to what people might experience with HPOT, because it starts to produce actually some of these reactive oxygen species, which you would normally think are non-ideal. But there's a mechanism called stressing, which basically it stresses the mitochondria, similar to what's happening in HBOT. Kind of like what happens when you work out with your muscle, right? You lift a weight, the muscle the tendons start to tear, and then you get kind of a stronger muscle over time. That stressing event happens in HBOT. You can actually build more mitochondria sites and get better function as a function of that. So there's a similar stressing component that happens with green that potentially, from what the literature shows, makes you to have more resilient or make more mitochondria as a result of that. Too much green would seems to be not ideal. And that's why, with the lasers that we're offering, we're kind of offering a balance of, hey, if you're going with the six laser model, there's four reds, there's two greens, or there's three reds and one green. Or, some people are requesting two reds and two greens. There's other utilities for red. Green has been found to be helpful with stimulating collagen growth. So people are using it aesthetically to help with wrinkles and stuff like that on the face. I don't have a lot of people doing that. But I think it could be a small complement in terms of what you might be looking for, in terms of PBM and stimulating different areas of the body. Violet has the most research behind it in terms of being superficial and working on skin ailments. So if you have, maybe some kind of fungal thing, or there's some kind of eczema or psoriasis, or even viral. There is research showing that it has the potential to work there. It's very superficial, so it doesn't go deep relative to the other energies. Some of the other laser companies make this claim that, well, it's really helpful with certain complexes because it's a higher energy per photon, and even though it doesn't get as deep relative to the other energies for the same number of photons, it can still interact with stuff in the blood, and that kind of gets it through the rest of the body. I don't know. I mean, to me, that sounds a little bit hand wavy, but we offer it as an option. It's not my go-to thing for, me using it for somebody that is maybe looking for some, cognitive boosts and things like that. In terms of how the devices are used, so, we say just start with the head, 5 to 15 minutes per day, or, you can do 10 minutes twice a day. It's very flexible. Keep it about this distance, about a centimeter away from the head, and just move it evenly over the head about the speed that you'd be doing if you were giving a haircut with a pair of electric buzzers. Just kind of move it and just go around all of the surface area of all of the lobes. Don't just sit on one lobe like this. That's not going to be the best way to use it. Move it evenly and just kind of like give it a massage. And 5 to 10 minutes, up to twice a day. Certainly, I think you can see, a positive aspect just working with five. You can do it while the individual is sleeping. That's the simplest way to start out. Now, you can graduate from that and you can go on to the vagus nerve area where the base of the skull is. You can decide to work on the oral muscles over here in the oral cavity. Stick your tongue out. Do exercises. These are all big muscles involved in the ability to enunciate and to pronounce things. And muscles are packed with mitochondria. The ability to help mitochondria implicates the ability to help the immune system and the ability to as well generate more energy. There's a lot of lymphatic drainage that goes on over here, right? This is why things like cranial sacral therapy and different exercises can be very helpful. Um, with these lymph nodes that are all around the neck, these are sites that you can also access. Um, Individuals have been using it on the kidney areas. If they find that their child or their individual needs some bandwidth in the kidneys, people that have very high oxalates are burdensome on the kidneys. That's in people that are doing some maybe chelative thing that's very burdensome on the kidneys. That's an area that you can target. Do you have to target that? No. Remember, the first 100 or so people that started using this device, very simple. Just use it on the head. And with that, very nice feedback. But you can go beyond that. You can just decide to work the liver if you wanted to for some additional bandwidth there. If you have a sore area that you want to, an injury, maybe that you want to see what the benefits are there, I would suggest try it out there because we've had a lot of different feedback on different ways to use the device. It's extremely simple. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Now, what you will find out there is that there were people and there are companies that are saying, hey, you got to do this protocol. You got to follow it this way. Um, in my experience, I don't think that that is 100% necessary. I don't think it's necessary at all. I think that there might be some optimal ways to use the devices, certainly. I think it's very user specific. I think that people will over time find what is the best way to use it for them and share that information with others and learn from others. But as simple as just 5 to 10 minutes once or twice a day on a body part will I think provide the feedback that you're looking for in using the device. Now, I could make a very fancy protocol that says, when you take the device, turn it on, point it north for 7 seconds, 7 seconds, turn it this way, stand on one leg, make sure that there's a full moon, drink orange juice before using it. And if you see something positive, that's the protocol. I think that, in this field, in this that we work in, there often is a lot of that goes on. I'm not saying that all of the protocols are like that, but I think that in trying to make something more complex, you lose of sight of really what you're trying to do. And at the same time, I think that there's a kind of a natural inclination for people to want to know how to use something. And so, if I tell you to use it a certain way exactly, and I make it this, this technique, there's somewhat of a believability making, there's somewhat of a self-belief that, this is gonna be more successful that way. And personally, I'm not that kind of person. I believe in only in not overstating things and obviously allowing people to have access to this type of tool to make it feasible there. But I don't like over representing things and saying information that I don't know to be true. There's a lot of things that what I would say connections and things that I've witnessed and that I kind of sit on until I feel that I could say definitively that this is helpful for someone or not. And so right now, I think that it's more than adequate to use it in this very generic way and people will see the outcomes that they want. Hopefully that gets kind of the point across. Now, if you happen to find this protocol that you like from another person, you can more than happily use it with the device. It's very flexible. So we made it to be super flexible, but also simple. The first program number one, can be used on all the body sites. And with the guide that you get, it'll tell you which programs may be more helpful for other body sites. But you can also program in your custom frequency pair. You can change the duty cycle. You can change the pulse duration. You can turn on and off certain laser combinations if you only want the red and you don't want the green. Do you need to use all of those bells and whistles? No. Can they be helpful beyond what the typical, just generic recommendation is? Possibly. So I think part of the reason why I put those flexibilities in there is because when I first started to design a device, I was not sure what people would want and what would be most helpful. And some of those things have stayed in there. And I think time will tell also, some things that we might find that are really, really stellar that make the understanding better. Um, so let's see. I think I had a list of other questions that people had asked me. If I can just pull that up over here. Uh, how long do people report changes? So remember, we're not allowed to make any claims on this stuff, but I would say most of the people report some kind of feedback, I'd say within the first session, if not within the first week. So it's fairly quick. And so I think that that's great. That so that you can get a good inference of what what would be desirable directly for you. Um, how frequently do they need to be used? It doesn't have to be used every day, but like I said, it can. It could be used twice per day. I do think that there's a saturation limit. So I think if you use it too much, you start to, there's a kind of an asymptotic benefit. And I feel that that's somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes per day. Um, I think we went over the differences in the colors and the models, in terms of the light characteristics themselves and the penetration we talked about. So hopefully this gives people some information to better understand the devices. The only thing a lot of times people will ask, you know, oh, is this better than that? And like I said, we there's no way for me to definitively answer that question. That would require me having 100 people use this device and then 100 people use mine, and then assuming that they're all the same. We don't have any of that. We only have the people that have used our devices, and I only really know the specs of my device and maybe one or two others out there. What I can tell you is this difference in the affordability, and you can see that, directly on the site. So, I just didn't wake up one day and said, oh, I'm going to build some lasers for the autistic community so we can reap some benefits. Um, you know, the reason why we started making these things is because I had visited a chiropractor for my son, doing some PBM on him, and I saw some gains, some very quick gains. And I asked the chiropractor, I was like, okay, I want to buy one of these devices. How much are they on? And he said, well, do you have $15,000 for this handheld thing? I said, $15,000 for a laser. In my background, I'm an oncology physicist. I went to school for condensed matter physics. I have two master's degrees in physics. Um, and I taught physics and engineering. There's no way that there's that much technology in this device. I mean, you can buy an iPhone for $600. Maybe they're more now, and there's enough technology, on that to send you to the moon. So I built my own one, and then I shared that with some people, and then that's kind of how this started over here. So the only thing that we can say that's different in terms of is the affordability, right? Because I'm not going to say that my device is better, although I do think that there's some things that I've put in here that are unique in terms of the pulsing, that are not on other devices. And but I'm not gonna. I think that that's for people to try out there. And my goal was really for people to have access to this that could not afford those other things, renting it out for $500 a week or buying something that's five, 10, or $15,000. Now there's a pro and con of everything, right? So if you go with the prior chiropractor, he's going to have a lot of experience. He's going to tell you exactly how to use it, how he likes to use it, the best ways to use it. We're not offering that. We're just offering affordable photobiomodulation, and you can kind of fill in the blanks thereafter. The monies that we make from selling these devices, we use to offset the deficits in the other products that we have. Most people don't realize that we have a supplement company, Research Elements, and you'd think that we sell a good amount of supplements, we have some great products, but the company itself is not very profitable. And I'm not saying this as kind of a um, holding up a flag for help. Is just that we price our lines specifically at a place so that they're very high quality ingredients, very complex formulas, and so that people can afford them. And the same kind of challenge, I say, go look at our ingredients versus other ones for the price there. It's very difficult to maintain that line, and particularly because costs have gone up and challenges from the manufacturing perspective in terms of delays and POs, and what something might have taken to make 4 weeks now takes 4 months. And so that means that there's a certain amount of financial things that have to be on the line for that period of time. So we use the funds for this to kind of offset that. We also use the funds for this to offset the microbiome pipeline. So the microbiome pipeline that we have testing through gutbalancing.com, which helps support the people participating at Autism is Biomedical Foundation. It's also the same kind of deal. We've priced our test and our model to be very, very low so that people can have access to it, because that's the whole point, is we want to help people out. And there are certain costs involved in maintaining the IT components, that people that we have to pay when things break, um, maintaining the pipeline, the data, the server. Every time a calculation is run in the pipeline, we get there's a charge for that. So we've priced it to be very, very low, and we're trying to use these funds to offset that, because there's going to be a point in the future where we kind of have to make these things that we've built stand on their own, rather than having kind of the I'd say the direct oversight of keeping them alive. There's a finite time of the funding that's out there that's kind of helping this mission. So that's essentially where kind of these things are helping out over there. But at the same time, we have a trial period with some of the practitioners that you can try for 2 weeks, and for the cost of shipping. We ourselves have a money back guarantee, less $100. So if you buy the unit and if you use it for 30 days, please don't email us on the 30th day. Try to email us before. If you don't like it, we'll send us the device back. We'll send you your money back, less $100, so that we can just recertify it and cover the cost of the shipping. So I think that that's a fair, way for people to try it. And, there's also some payment options on there where it breaks the payment up into four payments rather than one for the parents that have difficulty affording it. Um, that's basically everything in a nutshell. If people have any other questions, feel free to ask. There is a interview coming out probably about next week that I did with Len Akuri from the Secret Autism Parenting Secrets, where we talk more about these laser devices and some of the questions involved over here. And otherwise, thanks so much for the feedback and the participation, and hope you guys see some healing soon. Take care.